So, thank you all very much for joining us this morning and for your interest in Engaged Mindfulness Institute and teaching mindfulness. So, um, I would like to start us off with a little practice this morning just to help us all settle in together. So, I invite you to find a posture that for you feels relatively uplifted, awake, upright, and at the same time relaxed, stable, sustainable. And if for any reason of physical limitations you need to do this lying down or standing up or leaning against the back of a chair for support, please do what works for you. And if you are able to sit with a fairly upright posture, that could be helpful. Okay? So, having established our posture, I invite you to close your eyes for a moment. And I invite you to just allow yourself to drop into the body in whatever way feels workable and comfortable for you. And of course, as I'm guiding this, if for any reason the guidance is taking you into a relationship with your body or a place in your body that's too triggering for you, please feel free, feel completely empowered to redirect your attention elsewhere, whether it's outside of the body or to another location in the body. But please definitely feel empowered to take care of yourselves and direct your own practice, keeping it within the window of tolerance, while at the same time there's an invitation to sort of lean into the edges a little bit, to expand and reclaim really our relationship with our body at a deeper and deeper level. So very often our attention is up here in the head, so you might think about just sort of have a sense of letting the attention drop from the head down through the neck and shoulders, upper back, chest, down through the torso, through our seat and buttocks and lower belly, hips, down through our legs, knees, lower legs, ankles, and all the way down to our feet, and feeling that connection to the earth below. And then simply allowing ourselves to feel whatever we're feeling, especially what we're feeling physically, feeling the body inside and out as deeply as we can. So this includes all the sensations we can notice and feel on the surface of the skin from head to toe. And it also includes all of the internal sensations within the body. Just whatever we can feel. The overall weight and mass of the muscles and bones. Feeling of gravity holding us down on the earth. All the physical sensations arising and falling away with each in breath and out breath. The contraction and relaxation of the diaphragm muscle, the abdominal muscles, the intercostal muscles between the ribs, feeling the rib cage opening and closing with the breath. Possibly finding our heartbeat, feeling the blood circulation, Just the overall flow of energy and life force throughout the body, aliveness. Being willing to feel any sensations of discomfort that may be present, tension, aches or pains. Simply allowing ourselves to feel the body as fully as we can, inside and out, with openness, curiosity, non judgment. And I think most importantly, curiosity, a deep longing to know ourselves and experience this body, heart, mind as deeply as we can, right here, right now. And grounded in this deeper sensate experience of the body, the physicality of the body, the deeply felt physical presence of the body. Grounded in that, I invite us to simply let go into being. Just being. Simple presence. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, nothing to prove, nothing to accomplish or evaluate. Simply allowing ourselves to be just as we are in this moment. Relaxing further and further into beingness. While at the same time feeling the aliveness, the sense of aliveness, physical presence. Feeling and being and feeling. Just that. Feeling and being and feeling. Feeling and being and feeling.
People are reporting the audio is a little low.
Okay, I'll increase it. That should be better.
Yeah, that sounds better. Thanks.
Mhm. Okay. So this morning, I'd like to talk about our approach to teaching mindfulness at Engaged Mindfulness Institute, our approach to training mindfulness teachers. And I'm going to describe this from a neuroscience perspective. Our approach to teaching mindfulness and training mindfulness is deeply embodied, neuroscience informed, and trauma informed. And when we're teaching mindfulness, the most important thing is to be modeling the practice in any way we can and modeling the fruition, the results of the practice. We're really holding space for others and then competently introducing them to the practice, meeting them where they are, and giving them an on-ramp to the practice so that they can make a relationship with the practice and with their own mind. And then the practice is really their teacher. We're there to hold space, provide guidance, clarity, and really let them work with the practice, develop that relationship with their own mind, their own being, their own awareness. And then provide a kind of framework, a context that will help an individual stay on track with their practice. And our ability to do that really arises from our own practice. And even when we're teaching or when we're guiding, whether we're giving a short explanation like I'm doing now, or whether we're leading a guided practice, or whether we're answering questions, doing inquiry, whatever we're doing, while we're doing it, we're practicing. We're working with embodiment. We're training our mind. We're present, tuning in for ourselves, with ourselves, and to those we're present with and guiding. So it's a practice. Teaching is a practice. And it's seamless with our own mindfulness awareness practice. Our approach to the practice and to teaching the practice is really at the intersection of classic mindfulness awareness meditation methodologies as they're taught in mainstream mindfulness in this country, which for the most part arose out of the Buddhist tradition. We can find examples of mindfulness in all religious traditions, philosophical traditions, indigenous traditions. And mindfulness as it's taught in mainstream mindfulness originally derives from the Buddhist tradition. You could say in particular from the Satipatthana Sutra, and including the four foundations of mindfulness structure. But you could draw from many sources as well. So the approach we're taking is at the intersection between that and current neuroscience. Now, the great yogis of the past, in all the great contemplative traditions, in the Vedic traditions, the Taoist traditions, the Buddhist traditions that arose out of the Vedic traditions, the yogis had a deep knowledge of the human body that they developed introspectively. And this is very ancient. And this is before anyone had ever dissected a cadaver, which is the way Western science developed their knowledge of human anatomy And of course, now we have X ray and various forms of brain scanning technologies. But it's quite amazing the knowledge, the inner knowledge of the body that was developed by the yogis. So we're not completely inventing something new here or discovering something new. And yet, with modern neuroscientific tools for brain imaging, we can examine the neural networks involved in the practice and in the qualities that we're cultivating through the practice with much greater detail and precision. And we know there are 5 primary networks involved in the practice and that we're cultivating the strengthening of to facilitate healing, to facilitate greater mindfulness and awareness in our lives, and ultimately to facilitate or cultivate whatever we might think of with a term like awakening or liberation. And so we know how to do this with much greater precision than ever. And we can do our practices and combine our practices with much greater precision than ever in order to accelerate the deepening of our practice, the deepening of our awareness, our capacity for focus and attention, our capacity for self-compassion, our capacity for empathy and connection with others, our capacity for emotion regulation, emotional balance, and so forth. We can strengthen our overall well-being, and if you're familiar with my colleague Richie Davidson's work at the University of Wisconsin, they've done a lot of work on examining what are the constituents of what is called psychological well-being and the underlying neural substrates of that, and being able to target those with specific practices. And there's a lot of work being done in many, many research laboratories now. And a lot of exploration of this intersection between mind training of various kinds and what we're learning from neuroscience, which is deepening all the time. Now, I'm going to talk about some of these neural networks in a moment, but first I want to offer the caveat that the brain is an incredibly complex organism. The brain and the whole nervous system, an incredibly complex organism. It's one holistic enterprise. It's all operating holistically and interdependently. And although we can very much talk about discrete neural networks, which are physical realities and which can be examined with brain imaging, we can also talk about the brain in a sense of sort of energetic fields and think of what's going on in the brain more like the movement of waves of energy within the brain in a very fluid sense. So we can talk about it in this discrete way that seems a little bit more like talking about like the circuitry in a computer or something. And we can also talk about it much more in an energetic sense of flow and the movement of waves and energy and so forth. So there's different ways of looking at this, but I just wanted to say that. And anytime we're talking about the brain, we're in danger of oversimplifying because it is such a complex organism and we know more about it than we ever have, and we also know that there's a lot we don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know. We actually don't know how memory works. Western science does not have a clue how memory works, ultimately. Western science still does not know how consciousness, what we experience as consciousness, we're all conscious right now. We're aware that we're here. We're aware we're with each other on Zoom. You're aware that I'm speaking. I'm aware that I'm speaking. You're aware that you're listening. We're conscious. And Western science has no idea how what we call consciousness, arises from the neurobiological reality of the human body. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. And of course, they're beginning from the body because the Western scientific viewpoint is essentially materialist. So the material world is given primacy, and then we turn, well, out of that material reality, how does something like consciousness arise? And of course, from a more Eastern perspective, they would give primacy to consciousness, and then that this physical reality is a manifestation from consciousness. And that also begins to connect across, maybe across East and West. Quantum theory connects the two to a degree. Although quantum theory is still arising out of a materialistic paradigm, it gets it with the uncertainty principle and the fact that uh, we can't separate the relationship between the observed and the observer, and the act of observing changes. And you probably have all heard that things appear as waves or particles depending on whether they're being observed or not. And there's bilocality and non-locality and all kinds of strange phenomena when you get down to the subatomic realm. And so that starts to create a groundwork of seeing that there's a deeper level of reality than what appears to us as this solid, discrete, physical, relative world reality. And so, nonetheless, from a Western scientific perspective, and certainly from the perspective of brain imaging, we know a lot and we know we don't know a lot. It's very complex. So I just wanted to give that caveat, and then within that, talk about what we do know. So I'm going to talk about a number of neural networks here that are very important in the practice of mindfulness. And I think it's helpful for us as aspiring teachers or teachers to understand what we're doing in our own practice and how that's precisely developing certain capacities, and then learn to teach in a very precise way that's helping others embrace the practice in that way. And it doesn't mean we have to teach the neuroscience. Doesn't mean we have to teach the neuroscience at all. We could a little bit. We wouldn't want to get into it very much, I don't think. I think it could just be a distraction. But we can teach in a way that reflects our neuroscientific understanding of the practice and its potential. So the first network I'd like to talk about is the self-regulation network. The self-regulation network. And this is for regulating our own autonomic nervous system. Most of you are probably familiar with this, and that the autonomic nervous system has two branches. One upregulates our nervous system, that's the sympathetic branch. So it's from a basic alertness into stress or tension, can go all the way into panic, high stress, flight or fight, so forth. Then we have the other branch, the parasympathetic branch, sometimes called the relaxation branch or the rest and digest branch. And this is about down-regulating our nervous system, right? And the two are operating all the time. And there's an appropriate balance of the two for any activity we're engaged in, whether it's responding to a crisis or being ready to go to sleep and have a good night's rest and everything in between. And the wonderful thing is that the autonomic nervous system is connected with our breath. And this allows us to regulate our own autonomic nervous system by regulating our breath. So when we breathe in, there's a slight upregulation, sympathetic branch, activation of the sympathetic branch. The heart rate accelerates, alertness. When we breathe out, there's a slight activation of the parasympathetic branch and a slight deceleration of the heartbeat, and that more rest and digest relaxation response. So those two are happening all the time. And because that's going on with the breath, that's what creates heart rate variability, which you've probably heard about, which is a good marker of stress response. And when we get too stressed, our breath gets shallow, we don't have enough out breath, and the heart rate variability flattens out, we lose heart rate variability. So For most of us, our issue around self regulation is that we're getting too stressed, too tense, or activated, or we're getting triggered emotionally, experiencing amygdala hijack and these kind of things. So usually what we need is more down regulation. Generally what we need is more parasympathetic activation. Now there could be moments when we're feeling sluggish and we could use breath regulation to cultivate that alertness, to wake up our nervous system. We can use something called fire breathing, where we're doing quick breathing with our abdominal muscles in and out of the nose like that. And that wakes up the nervous system. That activates the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. Generally, though, with all the stresses of modern life and all the stress and anxiety that so many of us experience, what we need is more parasympathetic activation. And generally, what's called good vagal tone. The vagus nerve is a primary nerve in the central nervous system. It has two branches. And when we breathe diaphragmatically and breathe fully, it massages the vagus nerve and helps with parasympathetic activation and gives us what's called good vagal tone. So we can practice self-regulation. And I would say self-regulation is the core foundational skill for really becoming an adult human being. And I don't just mean a chronological adult. I mean an adult who takes ownership for navigating their own neurophysiology and takes responsibility for how we show up in the world. That's what I mean by being an adult, that I'm responsible for how I'm responding to what's going on within me and around me, and I'm responsible for how I'm showing up in the world. And I'm not responsible in the sense of wanting to blame myself. I'm responsible in taking ownership for actually navigating this, learning how to navigate my own neurophysiology so I can be in a self-directed, self-leadership position in how I show up in life. So self-regulation, very important skill. And we can develop it with breath, we can develop it with good posture, we can develop it with voice and vocal tone. All these things help with self-regulation, but the primary means is really breath. So learning simple breath regulation techniques like straw breathing, which emphasizes the out breath, 4-7-8 breathing, which also emphasizes the out breath, box breathing, where we have four parts to the breath and they're all balanced. So these are some of the simplest forms of breath regulation. There are many others, and then there's very advanced breath work, pranayama, and there's, of course, the Wim Hof work, and there's lots of different types. There's a very intense breath work designed to create expanded states of consciousness, like holotropic breath work. That's not so much about self-regulation. That's breath work in service of creating transcendent experiences. So what we're really talking about here is more the realm of breath regulation for self-regulation and developing good vagal tone. Just having breath awareness goes a long way. Just having breath awareness. So that, to me, that's one of the foundational things that we share and teach in mindfulness practice is breath awareness. Anytime we take a full breath and we're aware of it is a good thing, right? And we could all just take one deep breath right now. Let's take a deep breath together. Fill up the belly as deeply as we can, then take the breath up in the uppermost part of the chest. Like, and then just let it out like that. I'm sure as you do that, you feel a physiological shift. It's like pressing the reset button for our nervous system, just taking one deep, full breath with awareness, right? So breath awareness, simple breath regulation techniques, I think is important skills to introduce people to in mindfulness and to be working with ourselves. And also to develop a practice of generally slowing down the breath. The ideal rate of our breath is said to be 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out. To make it simple, I just go with 6 in, 6 out. So that's about this rate, right? So as you're breathing in, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, breathing out, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006. So that's much slower than most of us breathe most of the time, right? But we can just keep, anytime we remember, just slow it down and breathe. 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Throughout the day, anytime we remember, just stop and just start counting for a little. Just do it for a little while. And if we do that throughout the day, we'll over time slow our sort of baseline breathing down. And ideally, we want to get to that place where that's our normal breath rhythm: 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out, or more precisely, 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out, or 11 seconds for the full cycle of the breath. So, all these things, whether we're doing specific breath regulation techniques, in longer sessions or just in a moment to help self regulate, like straw breathing, box breathing, 4-7-8 breathing, whether we're just taking deep, full body breaths, or um, or other methodologies, whether we're just slowing our breath down in general, whether we're working with good posture, which helps with the breath, whether we're speaking with a clear vocal tone, all these things help with self-regulation. And if we practice them on a regular basis, this develops a more robust network in the brain for self-regulation, which involves the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, the insula, the amygdala, and the hypothalamus. And it develops a resilient, robust neural network that knows how to self-regulate on its own. And so self-regulation, there may be times when we always need to intentionally apply uh, self-regulation techniques, but if we're doing these practices on a regular basis, our self-regulation network will do the job on its own and will just naturally be more regulated. It'll be much more difficult for us to become emotionally triggered, to fly up the handle, to experience amygdala hijack. We won't be finding ourselves, in super stress and anxiety. We'll be neurophysiologically balanced, and our nervous system and our brain will develop a robust neural network that's doing that in the background all the time. Okay, so that's the first network. The second one is the attention network, and that's fairly obvious. In mindfulness practice, we're training our attention. That's a baseline. So there's always an object of mindfulness of some kind, something we're paying attention to. Could be the breath or it could be the body. In some cases, it's moment-to-moment experience, or there's ways to work with thoughts. There's ways to work with all the different sense perceptions. But the most common is to take the breath and or the body or both as the object of mindfulness. And when we notice that our attention wanders, we bring it back. Attention wanders, we bring it back. We do that again and again, and we've all heard that in doing so, we're kind of building that muscle of mindfulness, right? Well, what we're building the muscle of is really building the attention network. We're building the attention network. And this includes the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the parietal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex again, and the thalamus. And we're developing a resilient network that will allow us to be more attentive all the time. We'll have greater capacity for focus and concentration. We'll be much less likely to get distracted. It's harder to get distracted, right? So this network becomes resilient, and it's there operating in the background all the time, and we find ourselves naturally more present. And we have a greater capacity to direct our attention. We have a greater capacity to focus on what we're doing, to be concentrated, right? So this is the attention network. Now, all these networks are interacting, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And they connect some of the same parts of the brain, some of the same activities of the brain. So these networks are all operating in a holistic and interdependent way, and they all interact with each other. And the great thing about that is we get a synergistic effect by developing them all. I'll talk more about that. So the next one is the task positive network. The task positive network. And this modulates the activity of the default mode network. So many of you have probably heard of the default mode network, that it's responsible for a lot of our self-created stress and anxiety, that when we don't direct our attention and we just let the brain go wherever it wants, we let our attention wander wherever it wants, it tends to time travel into the past and into the future with worry, anxiety, fantasy, and so forth, as a running commentary about the so-called present, which isn't really the present, constantly thinking about myself, thinking about what others think about me. It's that noisy, discursive part of my brain that creates a lot of our stress. That's the default mode network. And it's activated when we don't direct our attention. And because of something called the negativity bias, it tends to go to the negative. And the negativity bias arouses out of the basic human condition, because job one for any species is survival. So we're set up to pay a lot more attention to risk and and novelty and differences, anything else. So our long-term memory ends up being full of experiences of threat and danger, and thus we have implicit memory and we spin things to the negative. So long and short of it, if we just let our mind wander, it's going to wander to the negative most of the time. And that's a source of a lot of stress and anxiety. Now, we're not demonizing the default network here because it has its purpose and its place. And in fact, if we can free it from fear and anxiety, it can be a source of tremendous creativity. And it is a source of creativity for many artists and as well as scientists discovering solutions or others trying to problem solve, discover solutions to problems, or music lyrics or a melody coming to a composer or something. All of this arises out of the default mode network when the default mode network is free of fear. And if anybody's ever been involved in psychoanalysis or you've heard about free association, that operates with the default mode network free of fear and anxiety. We create a safe space, get the person to really relax, and eventually you can go into this state of free association and access archetypal imagery, dream imagery, and creative solutions to interpersonal problems and so forth. This is the activity of the default mode network when it's free of anxiety and fear. But for us, most of the time, our default mode network is dominated by anxiety and fear. And it's what makes it very hard to meditate when people first start to meditate. So this one is really key for us in terms of teaching mindfulness, really key. So I don't know how many people have started a mindfulness practice and quit, but I would assume the number is extremely high, extremely high. In fact, I would say the majority of people who start a mindfulness practice probably do not continue it. Why? They find it difficult. They feel like their mind's racing. It's very hard to settle down. It's boring. It's hard. It doesn't seem to be producing anything very positive, and thus we don't continue, obviously. Right? So it doesn't need to be that way. It doesn't need to be that way. Now, people often mistakenly get the idea that mindfulness or meditation is about getting rid of your thoughts or having no thoughts, which is not the case, and they struggle with their thoughts, and struggling with the thoughts produces more thoughts and more tension and more anxiety, as we all know. So generally in good instruction, we train people to focus on the object of mindfulness, keep coming back to the body or breath, and to just let their thoughts be and to let it resolve itself over time. You can bring your awareness to thoughts, and generally they just kind of self-liberate. There's lots of different practices and different approaches, but the most efficacious way to have the noise of our cognitive activity lessen so that we can actually begin to relax into our practice is through deep embodiment, which engages the task positive network. So the task positive network and the default mode network are to a degree mutually inhibitory. Again, it's a bit of a simplification, but it's still accurate. They're mutually inhibitory, so when you activate the task positive network, the default mode network starts to go offline, and the mind quiets down quite naturally. So we don't have to struggle with our thoughts at all. We just really focus on the body, and the mind quiets down naturally. I'm sure you've all had the experience of doing something like trying to thread a needle where you're really focusing and at least for a couple of seconds, the mind gets very quiet. You may not be able to sustain it, but that's because you're activating the task positive network and you're actually experiencing that network shift in the brain, and the brain gets really quiet. Right? So the most efficacious way for me that I've discovered within mindfulness awareness practices is to really yoke our attention with the body at a deeper and deeper level. And when we open up, especially to the interior sensate landscape of the body, physical sensation within the body, by opening up and cultivating our capacity for what's called interoceptive awareness, which is internal perception. And I don't think there's any limits to how deep that can go. There's this vast somatic universe inside the body of sensation. The entire body is a living organism, all containing neuronal cells connected to the central nervous system, including the bones, the connective tissue, the muscles, circulatory system, the glands, the major organs, everything, lymphatic system, it's all sensory. And we can explore it and feel into it at greater and greater depth. It's subtler than the external sensation on the skin because the internal sensations go to a different set of neural networks to the brain that's less myelinated, less efficient, so the sensations are subtler. And sensations on the surface can go through a different set of neural networks that are highly myelinated. That's the coating on the neurons that allows them to communicate more efficiently. And so we're very sensitive to touch. So internal sensation, unless there's some extreme pain, tend to be subtle but still experientiable, and we can go deeper and deeper and deeper. Our interoceptive awareness can be profoundly enhanced. And that internal landscape becomes so compelling, it holds our attention quite naturally, and we yoke our attention with the body, with the deeply felt physical experience of the body inside and out, and that activates the task positive network. That keeps the task positive network engaged, and thus the default mode network goes offline, the brain quiets down very naturally. And so that it creates what's called attention stabilization. And as we're doing this, the body, mind, heart system, the nervous system is learning how to do this. So there's an internal neurobiofeedback loop going on where these systems are learning how to do this on their own. So with any practice, we start with self-directed, intentional self-regulation. All practices begin there, and it requires effort. And over time, it requires less and less effort with this approach because the internal systems are learning how to do it on their own. So we can move from intentional, effortful mindfulness, effortful self regulation, to effortless mindfulness, which is really important because to go deeper in our practice requires relaxation. And we've all heard about, to begin with, right effort, that we don't, not too tight, not too loose. If you don't make any effort, the mind's just going to wander around. If you make too much effort, it creates tension, right? But over time, we're wanting to move into effortless practice, and the way we do that is we train our own nervous system to do the practice through this natural, organic, internal neural biofeedback loop. So this is the attention network. Then we have, I'm sorry, that was the task positive network, which regulates the default network. So we have three so far. We have the self-regulation network, the attention network, and the task positive network. Then we have the emotion regulation network, which is very connected to the um, uh, self-regulation network. Basically, by regulating our autonomic nervous system, we're able to regulate our emotions. But there is a distinct emotion regulation network as well. It's very related. All this is interdependent, interconnected. But this, over time, allows us to have much greater emotional balance. We're still feeling our emotions. We're not repressing emotions at all, but we're not getting hijacked by emotions. And we're much more sensitive to subtle shifts in emotional energy. So we're well aware of emotional flows and shifts and changes in mood, tone, and emotion well before they become at the level where we would experience what Dan Goldman called the amygdala hijack, where the feeling brain takes control over the thinking brain and turns it over to the reactive survival brain. So we develop natural emotional balance, which means we can experience the richness of our emotional life, but in a well regulated, well balanced way. We're actually more tuned into our emotional life, but in a balanced, well regulated way. So that's the emotion regulation network. And then finally, we have the empathy network or connection network. And this is the neural network that's involved in connecting with others, in communicating safety to others, in developing openness and connection and positive relationality, intimacy where it's appropriate. It involves the oxytocin release. When we meet strangers, the default position neurobiologically is that stranger coming into our space is what? Friend or foe? Foe. Because job one for any species is survival. So everything is a threat until proven otherwise. That's just the way we're biologically set up. Well, when we get messages of safety, eventually the oxytocin release happens and we're willing to approach, right? Whether it's just to approach someone or whether it's eventually to shake their hand or give a friend a hug or whatever it is. And of course, the ultimate, we've all heard about oxytocin and its role in creating the bonding between child and the mother, the single parent, or the father to a degree. The mother's system after a pregnancy is flooded with oxytocin, the father's to a degree. So this is a neurotransmitter that's also a stress hormone, but it's also involved in creating connections. So the good news is that many of the same neural networks that are involved in enhanced interoceptive awareness and deep embodiment are also involved in connection, in connecting with others. So the more deeply embodied we are, the greater capacity we have for connecting with others. And there's a phenomenon called neuroception where our nervous system is scanning the world around us all the time. It's scanning through the five senses, but it's also scanning directly. And what do you think it's scanning for? Well, of course, it's scanning for threat because job one is survival for any species, right? So it's scanning for threat. And so we're scanning the world, and when we pick up messages of safety, then we're willing to approach. So with the development of the empathy network, we're communicating safety, we're communicating openness, we're communicating connection, right? So we get very skillful at creating connection, at creating safety, at creating good flow of relationship. And when there are difficult situations, difficult conversations, or conflicts and things, we develop and have naturally have the skills to bring a well-regulated presence to that, which helps de-escalate situations, diffuse situations, and bring them back into relationality. Now, another framework, I'm not going to get into this today, we don't have time, but you could look at all this through the polyvagal framework. It's a very helpful in Stephen Porges' work. And you can see how there's that green zone of optimal regulation. And of course, we're not going to be able to hang out there our whole lives. We actually want to be able to live up into the next zone, the yellow zone, where there are a lot of challenges, but be able to operate there in a well-regulated way, right? So this isn't about living in our comfort zone all the time or living in some protective bubble. Ultimately, it's like developing the skills to where we can be in a really challenging world, but we're still well regulated, right? So think of a person who is really well regulated all the time. They're almost all but immune to amygdala hijack. They just don't get emotionally triggered or out of control in that way. They're always well balanced. They're emotionally attuned to their own emotions. They're very much alive to their own emotional life, but in a completely balanced way. They're not getting hijacked. They're not getting triggered. They're always in a well-balanced, neurophysiological, emotionally balanced state. They're very attentive. They're generally, well-focused, concentrated, present. Their attention, they have stabilized attention. They're rarely distracted. And that because there's a natural task positive activation of embodiment, they have a very spacious, clear mind. They have a very spacious, clear mind that's open. It's not busy with distraction and thinking about other things. And they're very naturally relational and open-hearted and empathic and able to connect and tune in, right? So a person that had all these qualities, really optimized, what would we call such a person? Anybody? Anybody want to, let me open up the chat here. Anybody want to put something in the chat? What would we call a person who had all these kind of qualities? Self-regulated, enlightened. Yes, we might even call them enlightened. Right, exactly. Enlightened, liberated, awakened. Now, there's a lot of people studying these things, and I'm deeply involved in this research and study myself. Even if we get to really optimizing all of these neural networks, I think we'd be getting very close to what people would think of as a self-actualized person, an enlightened, a liberated person, a really optimal human being. There may still be a nonlinear tipping point to go into what we think of as full enlightenment or whatever that might be. I'm one who definitely believes there is such a thing. But so there's probably a nonlinear tipping point, but we're going to get very close to that by developing these neural networks in that way. And we can do so in a much more precise, directed, and accelerated way. In the past, a lot of us probably received some instruction of, basically you go sit on the cushion and you just sit there and, don't do much, and eventually something good will happen. Well, that's a very difficult approach to practice. If you just go sit on the cushion long enough, yeah, the mind will probably wear itself out and it'll settle, and but then again, you may still just be settling into kind of a dreamy state. I mean, without precise instruction, it's very difficult to actually make real progress with practice. And we don't have to sit on a cushion for 30 years to wait for the mind to play itself out. We can do these we can develop these capacities in a much more precise, directed way in a much shorter time. And that's good news because we also don't need to go out to a cave for 20, 30 years. Now, if that's someone's path to go do that, that's amazing and wonderful. But for most of us living in the modern world, we have a lot of responsibilities. And how much time can we dedicate to practice a day? 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour and a half, right? If we're going to be mindfulness teachers, we should be, I feel doing at least an hour a day. But even that's not 10 hours a day or off on retreat or living in a cave like a yogi, right? And but then there's also the micro practices we can do throughout the day. So maybe you have a formal practice of somewhere between half hour and an hour or more, and then you're doing micro practices throughout the day that kind of together build into another hour or so or something. Well, even with just that much practice, I think we can make very accelerated progress and development through these practices, much so, more so than we ever thought possible. And one of the reasons this is very important, especially for introducing the practice to people, is that in working with new practitioners, we can give them we don't have to explain all this stuff I've been talking about to them. But if we have this knowledge and through our own practice, we're good scientists, like we're our own guinea pig. We're training ourselves and we're very curious and we're constantly studying and constantly learning about all this and experimenting with different practices and different ways of practices. We're really getting to know ourselves neurophysiologically, neurobiologically, right? Then then we'll get to where we know how to give somebody a simple, easy on ramp to where, which will be teaching in a very deeply embodied way, but in a simple way that's going to give them a more positive experience right off the bat. Instead of sitting down and go, oh, this is so hard, my mind's all over the place, I can't do this, I feel incompetent, there must be something wrong with me, I'll never be able to do this. Instead, no, they're having an experience. Wow, this is kind of working. Wow, my mind's settling. Wow, this might be helpful. This might be useful. And thus, it's much more likely that they're going to continue with the practice. I do a lot of work in training correctional officers and uh, probation and parole officers, other corrections professionals, and first responders. And they consistently say, I could never do this. My mind races all the time, but we give them all kinds of micro practices to help them experience self-regulation very quickly. And they go, oh, that works, and that was easy. Okay, now we can add a little more, add a little more, a little more. But we have to give them experience. We can't just say, go sit down there, sit on the cushion, sit with a good posture. And I know it's kind of boring, but if you do it long enough, something good will happen. That approach isn't going to work for people, and it's not necessary. Okay? So there's a lot uh, of information available for all of you to explore. And in our Engage Mindfulness Institute teacher training programs, we provide a lot of this information, and we're always coming up with new ways to deliver it, make it available to you, and so forth. But these different neural networks, they they're all connecting different parts of the brain, some of the same parts of the brain. They're operating in an interconnected, interdependent way. And there's a synergistic effect. So when we're consistently working to strengthen our self-regulation network or capacity, we're enhancing our attention network, we're enhancing our task positive network, we're enhancing our emotion regulation network and our empathy network. They have a synergistic effect. So 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 is not 5. 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 25 or 105 or whatever. They have this synergistic effect. So the results become really accelerated and really powerful. Now, mindfulness practice done in a deeply embodied way, in the way that we teach it, a trauma informed and deeply empowered way, deeply embodied way, the way we teach it and train people to teach it in the Engaged Mindfulness Institute, is directly working with all these networks, directly working with all five of these networks. And there's other things we can do. We can do specific breath regulation techniques, like I mentioned some. We can be doing body mind practices, yoga, tai chi, qigong, that will also work on these networks. We can be doing practices like EFT tapping. We can be using visualization. We can be using all kinds of practices, and we can develop our own practice stack. So again, this is more for you. This wouldn't be for beginners, but the idea of stacking has been around for a long time. Audiophiles used to stack up high-end components. They were designed to be able to stack one on the other, called it your audio stack. In the digital marketing world, we have our tech stack. It's all different platforms we use, like Zoom is a platform that could be part of our tech stack. Um, in the world of biohacking, people talk about their supplement stack, right? The different supplements they're taking every day. So here we can talk about our body mind stack. Then there's also the idea of habit stacking. So and these come together because we can develop a routine for ourselves, which where we're integrating a number of different body mind practices, and we can move them around and do more of this one, more of that one, move them here, and just keep experimenting with different relations, see how we're optimizing the development, and eventually develop that stack and develop it into a routine. And by repeated activity, we link one onto another to another, and a set of well ingrained habits now becomes a well ingrained routine. And of course, over time, we can make changes and shifts in it, right? But we can get very precise about this. And there's lots of different body mind techniques we can use.
Fleet, Fleet, Fleet. People,
Yes.
there's going to be a few moments for questions.
Yeah, there will be. I'm going to open up in just a minute.
We're coming up on.
So the idea here is to take the available information we have from the mainstream mindfulness movement and from its roots in Buddhist tradition and other meditative contemplative traditions, and what we're learning from current neuroscience. And even if you want to get into it, there's some related quantum theory stuff that's very relatable and connecting, but even just the current neuroscience is enough. And start all to become kind of good scientists in terms of our own practice and really learning to use the available practice time we have optimally to develop ourselves. So we're becoming better regulated, more balanced, more present, more focused. We're actually realizing the results of our practice, and then this is going to allow us to more effectively hold space for others, and then to communicate the practice to newcomers in very simple ways, but ways that are informed by this level of precision, or what's going to give the best on ramp for someone into the practice. And there'll be some differentiation depending on where they are and who they are and what's going on, but still we'll be able to really give them that good, simple on ramp in a very informed and much more precise way, in a way that will help them start experiencing benefits from the practice right away. Okay, so that's the basic idea, and that's what we teach at Engage Mindfulness Institute. So let's open it up to some questions.
If you can raise your hand or type your question, here's one in the chat, Fleet.
Okay.
Heard, the doctor lying about what
Um,
From
there's
Michelle.
one about embodied practices.
With body dysphoria,
Yeah, yeah.
triggered by
So
focusing on the body.
yeah, so at the beginning, when I was just guiding us through a little settling in practice to begin with, I gave people a number of options, right? And I empowered people to direct their own practice. And if, you know, being more focused on the body, feeling the body was not workable, giving someone other options. So I think a good framework for this is Dan Siegel's window of tolerance. So you're probably familiar with that. But it's that bandwidth of life experience that we can handle in a relatively well regulated way. It's not the comfort zone. It could include challenging things, but challenges that we're able to handle in a relatively well regulated way. And of course, we can get triggered out of our window of tolerance. We get triggered into shutting down, hypoarousal, or we get triggered into hyperarousal, into getting upset or tense or acting out or angry and so forth, or going into rigidity behaviors, right? So we want to help people practice within their window of tolerance, but moving to the edges of it. That's how we expand our window of tolerance, because the window of tolerance shrinks for all of us through life with the bumps and bruises of life, and with trauma can shrink extremely so, even to the point of agoraphobia. And most trauma therapies are about leaning into the edges of that and then leaning back, leaning in, like Peter Levine's pendulating method. So we teach in a way where we give people lots of options and then invite them to gradually, very safely, in their own titrated way, learning to empower themselves to direct their own practice, to lean into the edges of discomfort, come back to where they feel okay, lean in, come back, And over time, what people have experienced, and clinicians and scientists and researchers experienced, is you can gradually expand your tolerance, and that which was previously too triggering now is not so, and we can gradually reclaim a greater bandwidth of our life. So, with any trauma related body issues, people can always direct their attention outside the body and use something outside, visually, auditorially, as an object of mindfulness. And over time, just very gently and gradually, in a safe way for them, or a workable way for them, begin to develop a relationship with the body. Okay, so other questions? Screen related tension, stress, distracted attention. Do you have some suggestions for this? You're talking about screen, I mean being online. I assume that's screen related, is what the person meant by that. Um, Again, it's all the same skills. It's the same skills. I've had some very interesting conversations with Stephen Porges when I've been interviewing him about our ability to co-regulate on Zoom when we're on Zoom or some other video conferencing technology like this. It's a little more difficult. Um, Downstairs in my studio, I'm able to look relative. My setup here, I'm able to look relatively sort of at the camera most of the time. I still need to look around to look at individuals here, but I have a teleprompter in my studio setup downstairs. So when I'm interviewing people, I'm looking straight at them with good eye contact. They're looking at me instead of having to go up and down like that with my camera being in a different place, right? But so, I think it's all the same skills. If we're on screen, if that's again what the question was about, it's using breath work. Yes, computer screens, great. So it's using breath work. Probably using, some blue light protection for eyes. I don't have mine on this morning, but I wear them. Here they are right now. Put them on. Most of the day when I'm working, I wear these glasses. And at night, I have some that are even a little darker. And these are blue light protection glasses. So there are things you can put on your screen as well to protect. But other than that, it's using posture, using breath to be in a well-regulated state, right? Yeah, same. It's all the same. Whatever the source of tension or anxiety or dysregulation is, the answer is regulation techniques. And we can do that at the level of body, mind, heart, spirit, and so forth. Yeah, any more questions? I'll just mention one thing. I mentioned the quantum reality before. That gets into it may sound woo woo, and sometimes people put it out there in the popular press in kind of woo woo like ways, but there is real quantum theory. It's been around since the 1920s and 30s. And sometimes mainstream science almost pretends like it's not there, but it's very much part of hardcore science. Uh, and um, and you know, both the quantum theory understanding and the more Eastern understanding was this physical world we're in. It's like the outer manifestation of reality in a sense. And the further we drop back into the depths of beingness, we're approaching more the quantum level, and we're approaching a level where things are well regulated, not broken, not fragmented. The further out you get, things tend to get fragmented and broken. You get all kinds of mistakes and problems in the outermost layers of how reality manifests. So, one way to heal is to plug back into source. And if you think about a lot of forms of healing, they really are about helping us sort of reconnect with source, whatever that might mean for us. People might understand that in spiritual terms or in the sense of the divine or in neurophysiological terms. But so if you can think of, if we all had like, we're modern, if we become modern robots, which may not be too far away, but we might have a plug, right? And at night we just go plug ourselves in like you do your computer, and overnight the whole thing would just get, we'd go back to the original source code, all the fragmentation would go away, and we'd be completely healed. Wake up. Well, sleep does that to a degree, by the way. That's what's going on with our brain, which is why sleep is very important. But if you think about it in terms of the deep contemplative traditions, dropping into the very depths of being in the deep flow states, into what are called samadhi in Eastern traditions, is really plugging back into source and creates profound healing physiologically, psychologically, emotionally, and so forth. Any other questions? Again, we really appreciate everyone being here today. Feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask a question directly. If there's a lot of us on several screens, I'll have to find you.
Wait, someone's asking about the recording. Yes, we'll post the recording next week on engagemindfulness.org along with the transcript.
Yeah. If you're interested in pursuing further training with us and you aspire to really become, a professional mindfulness teacher, and what do I mean by a professional mindfulness teacher? You might think, well, that's commercializing spiritual. No, what we mean is someone who is embracing the spirit of mastery and professional competency. And just like in any other field where there are certifications and standards, it's the idea of, really honoring practice and praxis. Like, hopefully, if one of us is a physician or a psychologist or a psychotherapist or a lawyer or any other profession like that, we're involved in an ongoing process of self-education and lifelong learning, and we're staying up to date. So our clients are getting the best from us all the time, right? That's that commitment to professional practice. So as mindfulness teachers and meditation teachers, I think it's the same idea of having that commitment to competency and professionality and ethical standards and really being able to bring forward the best and staying up to date with everything that we're collectively learning, right? And so keeping our learning up to date and also keeping it grounded in actual practice. So we're practicing every day and our guidance is not coming from memory, but it's alive in our practice, right? So if you're interested in pursuing that further, that's what we're about at the Engage Mindfulness Institute. And we have another cohort coming up of our teacher training program that'll be launching sometime this spring. And for those of you who are here at this webinar, we'll be offering you a very nice discount if you choose to enroll. So we'll be sending out an email to all of you. And if you'd like to get on the waiting list at that discount and even just put down a small deposit to guarantee your spot in the program, we'll honor that for everyone that's been here today. So you'll get an email about that. But if you have any questions about the program, then you can get online. You can talk to our wonderful Julie. You can have a call with her and talk about the program. But if you're interested in that, personally, I feel it's one of the best programs out there. I'm a little biased, but it's a really deep program in that it's very much focused in your practice and deepening your practice as the context for you becoming a professional mindfulness teacher. It's about embracing that spirit of life of mastery and lifelong learning. And you're exposed to some of the best teachers in the field. So we have over 30 teachers that are part of the online part of the program. And you're involved in a small learning group. And we set a very high bar. We want the people who we certify to be teachers we can be proud of as an organization that are getting out there and doing great work in the field. And so we create a very high bar for it. And not only do you go through the program, but then there's submitting a portfolio of practice teaching, recording, and creating curriculum designs, and there's practice teaching requirements. So it's a very robust program. It's not go somewhere for a weekend and get a certificate as a mindfulness teacher. You can do that too, lots of places around the world. But if you want to be deeply trained and in your path towards becoming really a masterful and professional mindfulness teacher, then I think you might be interested in exploring what we do. So anyway, that's all I'll say about that. But the website is engagemindfulness.org, engagemindfulness.org. So you can go there, and we will send out an email to everyone who is here for this webinar today, and to offer you a particular discount in appreciation for you coming today. So I think we're beyond our time already, but somebody said, is the POF class or something? Yeah, Path of Freedom is a curriculum that Vita designed for incarcerated individuals, and we train people in delivering that curriculum, and that's a completely different thing. An ideal thing is to become a certified mindfulness teacher and then become certified in the Path of Freedom, and that's kind of really an ideal combination. But we offer the Path of Freedom training online to uh, anyone who has an established practice that's interested, and that's a separate thing, a different thing. And yeah, so any other questions that might be there. Everything I talked about today, you can easily explore. Um, and we'll if you're interested in pursuing this further, there's documents we can share with you and all the professional journal resources to pursue the neuroscience. I'm constantly reading all this stuff, and I like, I'll read a journal article and then I'll look down at all the references and I'll go find those articles and read those and then go to, you can go way down the rabbit hole on this stuff, but it's a personal interest of mine. So, but anyway, we can provide you the basic framework so you can see that from current neuroscience, we literally know about these four and five. Sometimes we talk about four, sometimes we just talk about self regulation, attention, task positive, and empathy or connection network. And sometimes we add in the emotion regulation network because it's very similar to the self regulation network. But these all, we know what they do, we know the parts of the brain that connect, we know what that produces, and we know how to target them with specific body mind practices. And we know how to do basic mindfulness practice in a way that targets all of them. And then we get that synergistic impact. And personally, I believe we can accelerate our practice if we're practicing regularly, half hour to an hour, hour and a half a day. If we're practicing regularly, we can accomplish in several years what people normally would have spent 20, 30 years doing. And now it's still, you got to do the work. I'm not saying there's a magic bullet, but I think we can be more precise about how we develop our practice and combine various practices to target these networks and accelerate the results for ourselves and for others. And I think that's exciting. I think it's an exciting time to be alive. And we're very much at Engage Mindfulness, we're traditionalists in terms of honoring the deep contemplative traditions, East and West. And we're very much about being up to date with current science. So it's the integration of the two. Okay, well, I think that's probably it for the day. I'm actually committed to going out with my wife and getting a Christmas tree, so I'm going to head off and do that. And but great to see everyone today. Let me flip through the screens a little bit, see all of you.
I wanted to add, thank you, Fleet. I've been involved with meditation and mindfulness training for many, many years in many different formats, but you presented it so well here. So if people are really encouraged in this training, I really encourage you to do this with Engaged Mindfulness. It's you're doing great work, Fleet. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Very kind of you. Yeah. I think it's a very direct way to help people, and especially that, I'll just share a little story. I was in a post office yesterday, and I just witnessed something that was just kind of so, it wasn't very funny. You could see it as a little bit funny. It was mostly sad. But there was the person who was working the counter in the post. This is a little small town post office here in New England. There was a person working the counter, and I was observing them. There were three people ahead of me in line, and I'm just kind of standing there observing the situation. And the person working the counter was a bit cranky. They were a bit cranky, but there was a gentleman who was actually next in line, and I just looking at him, he looked cranky. Now I don't want to make assumptions about people, but he had kind of a cranky look to him. But at any rate, he just starts like talk. There's another person actually at the counter being served, and he just starts like talking like, "Hey, where's that Jason or what's his name? I think he's the postmaster. Where is he today? Is he here?" And she was not really wanting to be distracted by him and answering. And she finally says, "No, I don't know where he is." And so he quiets down. And later starts talking again. And, well, what is this? And finally she just says, she kind of barked at him, right? And says, "I can only work with one customer at a time, and you're very rude. You shouldn't be interrupting me, blah, blah, blah." So she kind of barks at him. And then he barks back, "Oh, you can't chew gum and walk at the same time, huh?" And then he storms out of the place. And I watched him get back in his pickup truck with his wife sitting there in a pickup truck. And I'm going, how did he explain to us? Because he still got his mail, his packages that he was intending to mail. I was thinking, what did he tell his wife, right? But, here was two human beings, both of whom were sorely lacking in self-regulation techniques, sorely lacking in co-regulation techniques, and sorely lacking in the self-awareness around both, at least in that moment, that day they were. And they got into a conflict which was completely unnecessary, that either one of them could have easily diffused with even the slightest bit of self-awareness, emotional awareness, self-regulation capacity, co-regulation capacity, right? And if you extrapolate this out into the world, well, we see our world is just full of conflict and war and all the rest of it, right? And it's really uh, human beings who have not been afforded the opportunity to learn to self-regulate and co-regulate, right? And one of our goals in life is to introduce as many people as possible to experiences that help them develop greater confidence and faith in their own innate goodness, the innate goodness of all human beings and all of life, and to develop good self-regulation techniques or capacities and good co-regulation capacities. And we feel this will really bring about world transformation if we can get significant numbers of people to have that context and those skills, right? Because all the conflict and war and terrible suffering we see in life really arises out of people not having confidence in their innate goodness, not having confidence in the innate goodness of others, not knowing how to self-regulate, not knowing how to co-regulate. And then you get all the suffering and chaos. So I just think this is really important work, and it's really a gift that we can learn to offer to people in really effective ways where they can immediately improve the quality of their life. We hear from correctional officers that are in how long is a 10-week program. And over the course of 10 weeks, we hear, their life is changing. They're sleeping at night for the first time in their careers. Their relationship with their spouses and children is dramatically changing. The level of drama they're experiencing with their peers is dramatically changing. And it's all by just simply using simple self-regulation techniques. Their life is beginning to change in really positive ways. So, okay, well, that's enough for today. I'm going to go get our Christmas tree with my wife, and you all enjoy your day. Have a great weekend, and we hope to see you around campus. Take good care.